You are standing in the middle of a farmhouse in January. Outside, it is 9 degrees. Inside, you are in your shirt sleeves, warm, comfortable, and there is no furnace running, no blower, no hum, no electric bill climbing while you sleep. Now look around that room. There is no thermostat on the wall. There is no vent blowing air. The warmth is just there, soaking up out of the floor, and the walls, like the house itself, is alive. Here is what I am going to prove to you today. A home can stay warm all winter long with no electricity, no gas company, and no monthly bill, using systems that heated this country for 200 years before the power lines ever showed up. The Amish never stopped using them. That is the whole secret. While the rest of us got hooked on the grid, they kept the old knowledge alive, quietly, on purpose. The first time I walked into an Amish home outside Millersburg, Ohio, on a bitter afternoon in February, I spent a good 20 minutes looking for the heat vent. There wasn't one. And by the time I left, I was angry, because I realized I had paid for something my whole life that these families simply refused to pay for. Stay with me to the end, because there is one technique buried in a German book from 1618, a book called The Art of Saving Wood, that almost nobody alive has read. It is so simple. You can set it up this weekend in the house you already own, and it changes everything. This is not just for people building a new cabin. This is for you, in the home you are sitting in right now. Let me start with the thing that shocked me most. Most people think a fireplace heats a room. It does not. An ordinary open fireplace is one of the worst heating devices ever built. It pulls the warm air of your room straight up the chimney and throws it away, and it sucks cold air in through every crack in your house to replace it. You sit there watching the flames, feeling cozy, while that fireplace is actually making the rest of your home colder. For centuries, people froze in front of roaring fires and never understood why. Then a man named Benjamin Franklin got tired of cold feet. In 1742, in Pennsylvania, he built what he called the Pennsylvania fireplace, a metal-lined box that sat out in the room instead of buried in the wall. The iron walls soaked up the heat and radiated it back into the room instead of losing it up the flue. He put a baffle inside, a metal plate that forced the hot smoke to take the long way around before it escaped, squeezing more warmth out of every stick of wood. We call it the Franklin stove today. And here is the part they leave out of the history books. Franklin refused to patent it. He said, since we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad to share our own freely. He gave it away to everyone forever. And David Rittenhouse, one of the finest scientific minds in early America, later added an L-shaped chimney to Franklin's design that finally made it draw properly, so the smoke went up the flue instead of back into the room. Between the two of them, Franklin and Rittenhouse, a couple of Pennsylvania men with no power company and no engineering degree, built a heater that outperformed the fireplaces in the finest mansions in Europe. And they did it with iron, fire, and the plane, understanding that heat wants to travel, so you had better make it travel through your room before you let it go. But even Franklin was borrowing, because more than 100 years before him, in 1618, a German named Franz Kessler had already published a book showing a stove where the smoke snaked through 5 separate chambers, one stacked on top of the other, before it ever reached the chimney. 5 chambers, each one stealing back heat that would have been lost. The knowledge was already there, it was already old, and it was already being forgotten. Therefore, the question becomes obvious. If we knew how to do this in 1618 and again in 1742, why is your home heated by a machine that shuts off the second the power goes out? Hold that thought, because it gets worse and then it gets a whole lot better. Let me show you the machine the Amish actually trust more than any furnace. It is called a Masonry heater, and once you understand how it works, you will never look at a wood stove the same way again. A regular wood stove gets blazing hot, then cold, then you feed it again, all night long, up and down, up and down. A Masonry heater does the opposite. You build one hot, fast fire in the morning, let it roar at over 1500 degrees, and then you let it go out. That fire heats tons of brick and stone built around the firebox. And that stone releases its warmth slowly, gently, for the next 24 hours. Think about what that means. The flames in a real masonry heater burn so hot and so clean that almost nothing is wasted. The smoke going up the chimney is only around 300 degrees because the thermal mass has already stripped the heat out of it and handed it back to your family. You are not heating the sky, you are heating the stone, and the stone is heating you. 1 or 2 small fires a day, and the house never truly goes cold. People who own them will tell you the surface is never scorching, just a steady, soft warmth you can lean your back against on the coldest night of the year. Let me put some numbers on it, because numbers are what finally got through to me. An open fireplace, the kind people pay a fortune to have installed today, runs at an efficiency that is often close to 0, and on a windy night it can actually be negative, meaning the house loses more heat than the fire ever produces. A decent airtight wood stove does far better, holding on to 60 to 70% of the heat in the wood. But a properly built masonry heater can capture the overwhelming majority of the heat from a single load of wood, because the fire burns fast and complete, and the stone refuses to let the warmth escape up the chimney. That is the difference between feeding a fire all night and building one small fire in the morning. That is the difference between a wood pile that vanishes by January and one that carries you clear through to spring. This is not new technology. This is ancient. The Chinese built heated brick sleeping platforms called the Kang thousands of years ago, a hollow bed with the stove's smoke running through channels underneath it, so a family slept on stored warmth through the night. The Romans built the hypocaust, raising their floors on little pillars and running hot air underneath so the whole floor became a radiator. And the Koreans perfected it with the ondol, a heated floor system so beloved that to this day Koreans prefer to sit and sleep low, close to the warm floor. Heated floors, heated beds. 2,000 years ago, no electricity, not 1 watt. But here is where I have to stop and tell you something, because this is the exact moment I stopped being a skeptic. When I sat with an older Amish man in Lancaster County and asked him why they never switched to a modern furnace, he did not talk about religion, he talked about control. He said, a furnace ties your family's warmth to a company, a meter, and a wire you do not own. He said, when the ice storm knocks out the grid and your English neighbors are shivering in the dark, the stone in his wall is still warm from yesterday's fire. That is not backwardness, that is independence. And somewhere along the way, we traded ours away without even noticing. Let me go back to that ice storm the old Amish man mentioned, because I saw it happen. A few winters ago, a bad storm came through and took the power down across 3 counties for the better part of a week. I watched neighbors of mine, good people with beautiful modern homes, sit in the dark and the cold, wrapped in coats inside their own living rooms, because the moment the electricity died, their expensive high-efficiency furnaces became nothing but heavy metal boxes. That furnace needs electricity to run its blower and its controls, even when it burns gas. No power, no heat, and a mile down the road, the Amish families never noticed. Their stoves were warm, their stone was warm, their bread was baking, their children were doing schoolwork by the light of a lamp in a warm room. That was the week I stopped thinking of them as behind the times. That was the week I understood they were the only ones who were actually free. I want you to understand just how completely these families are set up to be warm without us. In Amish country, whole businesses exist for nothing but this. There are Amish stove makers, families that have built heating stoves for generations, names like Hitzer out of Adams County, Indiana, and DS Machine, and Mullet, turning out wood and coal stoves built to last 50 years, not 5. A stove in an Amish basement or on the first floor is often the whole heating plant for the house, sometimes with a second stove in another room, and the heat simply moves through the floors and the open stairwells the way houses were designed to move it before we sealed everything up and put a machine in charge. They are not roughing it. Walk into one of those homes in the dead of winter and it is warm in a way a four-stair house never quite is, an even, steady, radiant warmth that comes from the surfaces around you, not from a blast of hot air that leaves the room chilly again 10 minutes after the furnace clicks off. Now, I have shown you the stove and the stone, but you are probably thinking these are big builds, big projects, big money. So before I go further, I want to hand you something you can actually hold on to. What I have shared so far is just the surface. The truth is, The same families preserved a whole quiet library of these methods, not just for heat, but for every room and every season, and I have spent years pulling it together. If you want the rest of that buried archive, the complete room-by-room collection of these Amish home systems, heating, cooling, the pantry that keeps food cold with no refrigerator, the natural pest control, all of it, it is gathered in something called the Complete Amish Home System, linked in the description below. There is a special limited time offer on it right now, so if you have felt that pull to take back a little of what was taken from you, scan the QR code on your screen before it is gone. Now let me get back to the fire, because the next part is the one that pays for itself. Let me talk about soapstone, because this is where old-timers were smarter than our engineers. Soapstone is a soft, dense rock that has a strange gift. It can hold more heat, longer, than almost any material a homesteader could get his hands on. The old Yankees knew this. In the 1700s and 1800s, a family would put soapstone slabs on the back of the stove, let them warm all evening, then wrap them in wool and slide them under the covers. A single hot stone kept feet warm from bedtime until sunrise. They carried them in wagons and sleighs, tucked under a lap robe, and rode for miles through the snow in comfort. No batteries, no cords. Just a rock that remembered the fire. A soapstone wood stove works on the very same principle. The iron gives you heat fast, but the stone keeps giving it back long after the fire has died down, so the room stays even instead of swinging from roasting to freezing. Therefore, the smartest old stoves were never pure iron and never pure stone. They were both fast heat and long heat, working together. But heat is only half the battle, because a warm home that leaks is a bucket with a hole in it, and this is where the forgotten systems get clever. Consider the humble root cellar and the banked house. Our great-grandparents did not fight the cold ground, they used it. 6 or 8 feet down, the earth stays around 50 degrees all year, summer and winter. So they dug in, they banked earth up against the north wall of the house, piled it high, sometimes right up to the windows so the wind could not claw the heat out of the walls. Some built the whole back of the house into a hillside. The ground became a blanket that never wears out and never sends a bill. A cellar under an old farmhouse did double duty. It kept the potatoes from freezing, and it kept the floor above from ever going truly cold, and they understood the sun in a way we have forgotten. Long before anyone said the words passive solar, farmers knew to put the long side of the house facing south, with the most windows on that side, and the barn or the woodlot planted to the north to break the wind. In 1796, a Massachusetts-born scientist named Benjamin Thompson, who became known as Count Rumford, redesigned the fireplace itself. He made it shallow, tall, and sharply angled at the back, so instead of swallowing the heat, the fireplace threw the warmth straight out into the room. A Rumford fireplace radiates heat you can feel across the room from the very same wood a bad fireplace would have wasted. His design was so good that thousands of homes were converted within just a few years, and you can still find his fireplaces in 200-year-old houses today, still working exactly as he intended. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You do not need to tear down a wall or pour a new foundation to steal back this old knowledge. Here is what a family did in a farmhouse near Holmes County that I will never forget. They took the cold, unused thermal mass they already had, the brick chimney running up through the center of the house, and they simply stopped hiding it. Most people box in their chimney, wall it off, cover it with drywall. This family exposed it. That brick, warmed by the stove below, became a radiator on every floor it passed through, giving warmth back into the bedrooms upstairs long after the fire settled down for the night. The mass was already in the house. They had just been insulating themselves against their own free heat. Consider the double windows, what our grandparents called storm windows. A second pane hung on the outside every fall and taken down every spring, creating a pocket of still air that slowed the cold to a crawl. Consider the transom, the little window above the door, opened or closed to let warm air move between rooms exactly where you wanted it. Consider the thick plaster over brick walls of an old house, themselves a form of thermal mass, holding the day's warmth long into the night. Consider the low ceilings in old farmhouses, kept deliberately low in the living areas so there was less air to heat, with the grand high ceilings saved for the summer parlor. Every choice had a reason. Every reason was comfort without a bill. We tore out the storm windows, raised the ceilings, opened the floor plans, and then bolted on a machine to fight the cold we had just invited in. Do this in your own home. Find where your warmth is escaping and where your mass is hiding. Heavy curtains, the old-fashioned kind, thick and lined, pulled shut at dusk, can cut the heat pouring out your windows dramatically, and the old-timers had a name for the padded ones. They hung quilts over doorways to close off rooms they were not using, shrinking the space they had to heat down to just the rooms where the family lived. They shut the upstairs by day and opened it only at bedtime, letting the day's heat rise up the stairwell right when they climbed into bed. Not one of these tricks needs a contractor. Not one needs a permit. Not one needs a dime paid to anyone. Here is another one almost nobody remembers. The Amish and the old farmers understood that you heat the person, not the room. This sounds obvious, but it flips everything we do on its head. We spend a fortune heating every cubic foot of air in a big house, ceilings and hallways and empty corners, just so the small amount of space around our own bodies is warm. The old way was the reverse. You warmed yourself and the small space you actually occupied. The heated bench by the stove, the lap robe over your knees, the warm stone at your feet, the quilt-walled bed. The family gathered in one warm kitchen while the rest of the house stayed cold and nobody minded because nobody was in it. Heat the person, not the room, and your fuel goes 10 times as far. That single change in thinking is worth more than any gadget you can buy. And this is the part that started to make me angry all over again, because these methods did not disappear by accident. For most of history, a family that could heat its own home owed nothing to anyone. Then heating became a product, something you buy month after month, forever. And it is a very good business to be in, selling people something they cannot live without and cannot make themselves. Somewhere in the last century, the self-heating home quietly became a problem to be solved, not by making you warmer, but by making you a customer. The old systems were labeled quaint, old-fashioned, obsolete. Not because they stopped working. They never stopped working. They stopped working for someone else's bottom line. Now, here is where the villain stops being an accident. For a long time, I told myself this was just progress, that we drifted away from these methods because electricity was easy and nobody was to blame. But the more I dug, the less innocent it looked. Think about who profits when a family can no longer heat its own home. Think about who profits when warmth becomes a subscription, billed every single month, in every single house, forever. Whether the economy is good or bad, whether you are working or retired, whether you can afford it or not. That is not a market. That is a captive, and a captive is worth protecting. The self-reliant home became inconvenient to an entire industry, and inconvenient things have a way of being labeled backward, unsafe, and obsolete until people are ashamed to want them. You were not taught to laugh at the wood stove and the root cellar by accident. Someone benefited every time you did. The Amish saw that trap coming and simply refused to walk into it. And the more time I spent among them, the more I realized their so-called backwardness was actually the clearest thinking I had ever seen. And it did not stop with heat. Once you start pulling this thread, the whole modern bargain starts to unravel in front of you. Because the same house that cannot heat itself, cannot cool itself, cannot keep its food cold, cannot pump its own water, all without a wire coming in from outside. Every one of those functions used to be handled by the design of the house and the knowledge of the family. We did not just lose the art of heating. We lost the art of living in a home that takes care of you instead of the other way around. Let me give you more of these forgotten systems one after another because each one is a small piece of freedom. There is the German cockle stove, the Kachelofen, a tile-covered masonry heater with a bench built right into the side, warmed by the same fire, where the family would sit and the old folks would sleep on the coldest nights. There is the Scandinavian contraflow heater, cousin to the masonry heater, where the hot gases travel up and then down through channels of brick, wringing out every last degree. There is the cast iron cook stove, the true heart of the old farmhouse, that cooked 3 meals a day and heated the kitchen and the rooms above it as a bonus, never wasting a single fire. There is the heat grate, a simple iron grill cut into the ceiling of the room with a stove, letting warm air rise naturally into the bedroom directly above, no fan required. just the plain fact that heat rises. There is the warming oven and the warming shelf, the closet or nook built beside the chimney where bread would rise, clothes would dry, and a child could warm his hands. There is the summer kitchen, a separate room used to push cooking heat away from the house in July, and then abandoned in winter so all that cooking heat stayed indoors where it was wanted. Think about how much sense that made before anyone had a furnace. The cook stove was going anyway. You were boiling water anyway. You were baking bread anyway. So every one of those old systems was built to catch heat that was already being produced and put it to a second and a third use. The water on the side of the stove was hot because the fire was already lit. The bricks at the foot of the bed were hot because supper was already cooked. The bread rose in the warming shelf because the chimney was already warm. Nothing was single purpose. Nothing was wasted. A modern house throws away more heat in a day than one of those farmhouses used in a week, and we call ourselves the advanced ones. There is the fireless cooker, a well-insulated box where a pot brought to a boil would keep cooking for hours on its own stored heat, saving fuel and keeping a meal hot till supper. There is the heated brick or the heated stone at the foot of the bed. There is the bed warmer, the long-handled brass pan filled with embers and passed between cold sheets before you climbed in. There is the humble hot water bottle which by the 1800s warmed millions of beds, first in stoneware, then in rubber, the same trick your grandmother used. There is the canopy bed, which we now think of as decoration but which was pure survival, heavy curtains drawn all the way around to trap your own body heat in a small pocket of warm air through a freezing night. There is the sleeping loft above the kitchen, the warmest spot in the house, where the children slept on the rising heat of the banked fire. There is the wood-fired water heater and the reservoir on the side of the cook stove, giving hot water with no tank and no element. There is the parlor stove and the box stove, the smaller iron stove set in the rooms families actually used. There is the Pennsylvania Dutch bake oven, the beehive-shaped masonry oven that held its heat so well you could bake bread, then roast a meal, then dry fruit, then finally warm a room, all from one firing, working its way down the temperature ladder for a full day. There is the smokehouse and the spring house, cousins to these systems, using the same understanding of mass and airflow to preserve rather than to warm. There is the heated brooder for the young animals, and the deep litter bedding in the barn, where the natural composting of straw and manure gives off real heat that kept livestock and the rooms above them warm through the worst of winter, a trick every old dairyman knew. There is the Trombe wall, named for the French engineer Félix Trombe, a thick, dark masonry wall built just behind south-facing glass that soaks up the winter sun all day and radiates it back into the room all evening, a solar battery made of nothing but stone and sunlight. There is the attached greenhouse, or sunroom, on the south wall that catches the low winter sun and pours warm air into the house on a clear, cold day. There is the thermal shutter and the insulated window quilt, closed at night to hold the day's warmth inside. Let me say a little more about the Trombe wall, because it is the closest thing to free heat that exists, and hardly anyone in America has heard of it. Félix Trombe was a French engineer who, in the middle of the 20th century, took an old idea and proved it with science. You build a heavy, dark-painted masonry wall on the south side of a house, and you set glass a few inches in front of it. The winter sun pours through the glass and strikes that dark stone all day long, and the stone drinks it in. Then, as the evening comes and the outside air turns bitter, that wall slowly gives every bit of that stored sunshine back into the house, radiating warmth for hours after the sun has set. No pump, no panel, no wiring, just glass, stone, and the sun that shows up for free every single morning. Farmers were doing a rougher version of this for centuries by piling stone and building thick south walls, but Trombe put numbers to it and showed it could carry a real share of a home's winter heat all on its own. There is the earth-bermed wall, the sod roof, and the double-wall log construction packed with sawdust or moss for insulation. There is the smoke bench and the heated floor channel, the ondole principle, running a stove's exhaust under a masonry floor before it leaves the house. There is the simple wood pile stacked against the north wall as a windbreak, and the row of evergreens planted to the northwest, A living wall that old farmers knew could cut a brutal wind and lower the heating load of a house year after year, growing more valuable the older it got. And do not overlook the simplest system of all, the one that costs nothing and that every old-timer treated as gospel. Close off what you are not using. In the old farmhouses, half the house was simply shut down for the winter. The doors were closed, the quilts were hung, and the family drew in tight around the kitchen and one or two warm rooms. In spring, they opened the house back up. We do the opposite. We heat 5,000 square feet so we can live in 400 of it. The old people would have thought we had lost our minds. And standing in my own oversized, overheated house one December, staring at a furnace bill I did not want to open, I finally understood they were right. Every single one of these ran on wood, sun, earth, or human cleverness. Not one of them ran on a wire, and together they did not just take the edge off. They kept whole families, in far colder winters than we complain about, genuinely warm. I have handed you more than 24 of these forgotten systems now, and I want you to notice something about all of them together. Not one of them was invented by a corporation. Not one of them needs a specialist to service it. Not one of them fails when the grid fails. They were invented by ordinary families who had no choice but to be clever and refined over hundreds of winters by people who could not afford to be wrong, because being wrong meant being cold. That is the opposite of how we live now, where we trust our survival to systems we do not understand, cannot repair, and do not control. The Amish never made that trade, and everything I have shown you today is proof that you do not have to either. Therefore, here is the thing I need you to really sit with. We did not lose this knowledge because we found something better. We lost it because we found something more profitable for someone else. Every one of these systems still works today, exactly as well as it did 200 years ago, waiting in old books and old barns and old Amish workshops for someone to remember. And now I am going to give you the one I promised at the very beginning, the one from that German book of 1618. Remember Franz Kessler and the Art of Saving Wood? Everyone who talks about that book talks about his clever 5-chamber stove. But buried in that same old idea, carried down through the German settlers into Pennsylvania Dutch country, and kept alive by the Amish, is something far simpler that almost nobody teaches. It is not a machine at all. It is a principle, and you can do it this weekend in the home you already own for almost nothing. Here it is. Heat does not have to be made continuously. It can be stored and then released. That is the entire secret behind every masonry heater, every ondol floor, every soapstone bed warmer, and it works at the smallest scale too. Take a few common fire bricks, or better, a couple of slabs of soapstone. Set them on top of or right beside whatever heat source you already have, your wood stove, your cook stove, even your oven, and let them soak for an hour or two while the fire is going anyway. That stone is now a battery charged with heat, costing you nothing extra because the fire was already burning. Then wrap that hot stone in a towel or a piece of wool and put it where you actually are, at your feet under the desk, under the covers, 20 minutes before bed, so you climb into a warm bed instead of a cold one and never touch the thermostat. Beside your chair in the evening, one charged soapstone slab will throw gentle heat for hours, long after the fire is out, which means you can let the fire die at night and still sleep warm. This is exactly what the old Yankees did in their sleighs, exactly what farm families did every single winter night, and exactly what keeps working when the power is gone and the furnace is a cold, dead box in the basement. Now, stack the principle. Put real thermal mass behind your stove, a wall of brick or stone or even filled water containers, and that mass will catch the heat that would have gone up the chimney or into the wall and give it back to the room for hours after the fire goes out. Add the exposed chimney. Add the closed quilts on the doorways. Add the charged stones in the beds. Suddenly your one small fire is doing the work of a furnace that never stops, and you are warm at 3 in the morning on stored heat on a night the grid went down for everyone else on your road. The knowledge existed. It was written down in 1618 and given away for free by Franklin in 1742. It was labeled obsolete and quietly pushed aside because a warm, independent family is a terrible customer. But it was never truly lost, because a stubborn, plain people in Pennsylvania and Ohio refused to let it die, and now it is yours again. I paid strangers to keep my family warm for more than 30 years, and the whole time, the way to do it myself was sitting in a book older than my country. That is what they took from us, not comfort. Comfort we can buy. What they took was the knowing, the plain confidence that you can keep your own people warm with your own two hands, no matter what happens to the wire on the pole outside. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect somebody else's profit, then you already know what to do next. Tell me one thing in the comments. Out of everything I just showed you, the soapstone at the foot of the bed, the exposed chimney, the Rumford fireplace, the heated floor, which one are you going to try first this winter? Say it out loud in the comment section below, because I read them, and I want to know which forgotten system is coming back to life in your home. And if you want to stand with the people who are quietly taking this knowledge back, one stone, one fire, one warm room at a time, subscribe and stay with me. Because the next thing I am going to show you is how those same families keep an entire pantry of food cold all summer long with no refrigerator and no electricity, using nothing but the ground under their feet. You are not going to believe how simple it is. I did not either, until I saw it with my own eyes.